Hi, my name is Mary Kate Coleman. I'm a new PhD candidate at UIC. I'm in the English department. My focus is creative writing. I'm a fiction writer. Thank you so much for attending this presentation today. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my experience with digital storytelling. I have been working for the last about 2 years with the project Humanizing Deportation. So I'm going to be going over that a little bit. And also I wanted to talk more generally about digital storytelling as a tool for conducting creative research and also creating a greater dialogue between communities about pressing social issues. So I wanted to begin by talking just a little bit about the project Humanizing Deportation. Our archive for Humanizing Deportation is hosted by UC Davis, but the project was actually started as a collaboration between UC Davis and the College of the North Border in Tijuana. So we originally started working in TJ, that's Tijuana, I'll probably refer to it as TJ throughout the presentation. But we've now expanded to 7 different sites in Southern California and Mexico. For the project, community storytellers work with academic teams. And when I say teams, I really mean that we work one-on-one, an academic investigator with a community storyteller to create testimonial audio-visual shorts. It's not, people have a lot of misconceptions about what digital storytelling is, or you say the word digital storytelling and it means different things to different people. I'll go through and kind of define a digital story here in a minute, but just for the purposes of the project for Humanizing Deportation, the way that we go about digital storytelling, it's not documentary film, it's not ethnography, it's not reporting, investigative reporting of any kind. It's really kind of a DIY project. We work together with sort of low-tech tools to create a short video that details the community storyteller's immigration experience. We're not aspiring to a high level of artistic or technical quality. The whole point is to put the tools into the hands of the community storyteller and have the story come out as naturally as possible with as little sort of influence of the facilitator, of the investigator as possible, in order to allow the narrators to speak for themselves.
Realmente mi experiencia en cuestión del sueño americano fue algo que nació de mi esposa. A mí siempre me pedía que me fuera a Estados Unidos, ¿no? Que me fuera. En realidad yo no quería, sí, realmente no me nacía irme, pero a la que era mi esposa sí, ella sí tenía esa ilusión de irse a Estados Unidos, en lo cual cuando llegó en un momento de decisión, ella dijo, bueno, pues si tú no te quieres ir, me voy yo. Y bueno, pues yo la quería mucho, dije, bueno, pues cómo la va a dejar ir, que se vaya sola. Decidí pues emprender ese viaje. Estuvimos en una casa encerrados, éramos como... En la casa donde nos llevaron a nosotros, a mi esposa y a mí, había como 12 personas y muchos, la mayoría eran hondureños, de El Salvador. Entonces ahí nos tuvieron como 4 días, pero en esos 4 días no comes bien porque no te llevan pollo y creo que una vez al día, recuerdo. Y en ese momento, y en ese mismo lugar, nos decían que no teníamos que salir a la calle, que no teníamos que ni hacer ruido, teníamos que estar calladitos. Y yo no entendía por qué razón, pues si yo estaba en mi país todavía, ¿no? O sea, yo estaba en mi país, ¿qué pasaba? Entonces descubrimos que era un lugar donde vendían droga, era un punto de droga. Y pues teníamos que estar callados porque si no también nos podían afectar a nosotros, los que estaban ahí como encargados de ese lugar, pues eran los encargados también del punto, nos podían a lo mejor hacer algo a nosotros. Y nos pidieron que nos tuviéramos comunicados con la familia, sí, nos quitaron teléfonos. Entonces como yo no sabía, era la primera vez que pasaba por esas cosas, era como que pues a lo mejor así es, sí, a lo mejor así es. Prácticamente después entendí que en ese lugar estaba secuestrado. Nos tuvieron ahí, digo, entre 4 o 5 días hasta que hablaron con los familiares y nos dijeron que nos llevaban, que nos llevaban nos iban a llevar ya con un guía y que íbamos a caminar. Y efectivamente pasaron algunas horas cuando amaneció y nos llevaron a la terminal de camión de Piedras Negras y ahí no supe exactamente hacia dónde nos llevaban, pero nos llevaron y como a medio camino el autobús se detuvo y nos bajamos casi 40 personas, 40, 50 personas, todo el autobús iba lleno de puros inmigrantes y nos llevaron a un rancho. Caminamos a un rancho pues nos habían dado un galón de agua de 4 litros y por tu mochila. Llegamos hasta un rancho donde pues era un rancho que criaban vacas y recuerdo que era en el tiempo que había mucho mosquito. Yo recuerdo cómo nos picaban los mosquitos. Era algo bien feo porque pues estar en un lugar que no conoces, en el cerro, en un rancho en donde pues, no sabes qué va a suceder. Prácticamente en ese momento ya nosotros estamos preocupados, pero no nos podíamos comunicar con nadie. Para mi familia ya teníamos 8 días desaparecidos, ellos no sabían nada de nosotros ya, no podíamos comunicarnos con nadie. Estuvimos una noche todavía en ese rancho y al siguiente y en la madrugada comenzamos a caminar hacia el río Bravo. Y cuando llegamos al río Bravo, pues ya nos cruzaron. Pero el guía que nos asignaron, vamos, el que nos iba a llevar, era de Guatemala. Y el muchacho, hasta eso, ese muchacho no era tan mala onda, ¿no? O sea, siempre. Cuando llegamos a la orilla del río Bravo, ahí estuvimos como una noche entera, creo, más o menos. De ahí, en esa noche estuvieron planeando cómo cruzar, porque pues éramos un total de 17 personas que íbamos a cruzar. Recuerdo que tenía mucho miedo porque mi esposa y yo pues no sabíamos nadar muy bien y aparte de eso pues era como por pláticas de gente que ya había pasado por esas experiencias, de gente que veían que se ahogaban en el río Bravo, sí, familiares que se les ahogaban ahí y pues yo tenía mucho miedo, pero pues no teníamos otra opción que caminar, sí, que cruzar. Cruzamos el río Bravo y eso ahí fue donde comenzó la experiencia más fuerte.
So I wanted to show this video partly because I think it really gets at the heart of what digital storytelling is all about. Digital stories aren't just identified by being made up of various audiovisual elements or by being under 5 minutes in length, but by telling personal stories. And often these personal stories are personal stories that grapple with social or political issues. And so they're kind of telling a larger story about the community, but at the individual level, about how these issues impact the individual, which is part of what makes digital storytelling so great for stories about immigration issues. So I wanted to talk next just a little bit about my training. I did a week-long training session in Guadalajara in 2018. They were setting up a new research site there in collaboration with the University of Guadalajara. And so I got my Fulbright right around that time, and I tagged along for a week-long training session. So the way that StoryCenter works, StoryCenter, it's recently called StoryCenter. It used to be the Center for Digital Storytelling. It is hosted out of Berkeley. It's an organization that's been around for a really long time. So they've been working on digital storytelling since the 70s and 80s, really. But it was officially founded in 1998, and they more or less wrote the book on this kind of digital storytelling. We use their methodology, or we use sort of, we're informed by their methodology at Humanizing Deportation. We use the StoryCenter methodology, and we've kind of tweaked it to better suit our needs with the kind of work that we do. The way that their workshops work is that you gather people from the community. Usually it's about a group of 10. Everybody gets into the same room and they're together for 3 full days. It's a 3 full day workshop. And these community workshops are about first teaching people what digital storytelling is all about, sort of showing them some digital stories, talking about the medium, and also talking about how we discuss the shape of a story in digital storytelling so that they can start to think about their own stories. At the end of the first day of the workshop, of the StoryCenter workshop, everybody we call it a story circle, everybody in the story circle shares their story. And we have just a few moments for reflection, for questions. It's not a critique, it's more a support circle. And people can talk about what they found interesting about the story, what they would like to know more about as the narrator is thinking about how they're going to craft their story into a written narrative. And then the second and third days of StoryCenter's process are all about the actual hands-on making of the digital story. So in this training session, I learned basically the adapted version of that same methodology of the 3-day workshop. But with Humanizing Deportation, what we do is we have kind of split that up into 5 to 6 separate meetings with the community storyteller. So the first meeting, you're going to get together, you're going to talk about the project, what we're doing with the project, what the goal of the project is. And then usually in that first meeting, you hear the person's story. The second meeting is all about writing the script, working together on creating that script. And then you have, I won't go along in detail, but essentially meetings 3, 4, 5, and 6 are just kind of split up into those steps of the process of, okay, then maybe in the third meeting, you might be recording the audio. In the fourth meeting, you might be gathering photos together and figuring out which photos should go where, even possibly creating a storyboard so that you are really getting the storyteller's vision across. And the idea is that by the 6th meeting, you're gathering to watch the digital story together and have the community storyteller tell you if everything has been implemented according to their vision for their own story. And so that essentially is what I found to be kind of the ideal version of our methodology, the way that it should work, the way that it sometimes does work. But what I found when I got on the ground in TJ is that fieldwork is complicated and things don't always go according to plan. So in order to illustrate that, I'll tell you about my very first encounter with people who were willing to work with me on this project. I met up with Juan and Frank. They are 2 deported veterans. For anyone who doesn't know, Tijuana is kind of a hub for activism for deported veterans. These 2 individuals that I worked with were actually from Juarez. They lived over in Juarez, but they were in TJ for the weekend for Veterans for Peace conference. And I heard from the organizers of one of the activism groups that, like, hey, we've got these 2 guys who want to work with you. I said, okay, great. When can they pencil me in? So I showed up on Friday, and the first meeting went just exactly as planned. We sat down, we talked about the project, I heard their stories. We even had a little bit of time at the end for them to kind of sit down with pen and paper and start working on their stories. But at the end of that, whatever it was, hour or 2, they had other stuff they had to do for the conference. They went about their day with the idea that they sort of had this homework of finishing their stories. They were going to sit down that night, write out the rest of the story, and then when I got there the next day, we would look at the story together, edit the story, and go ahead and make a recording. So as you may have guessed, when I showed up the second day, that had not happened. they were busy, they had stuff going on, they were together with this brotherhood of people they really loved and cared about, so they had just been hanging out, you know, and they hadn't even thought one thought about the digital story by the time I showed up the second day to, you know, edit their written stories. And so and of course it's not like, you know, normally I could have been like, oh well, you know, let me just come back next week, let me give you a little bit more time, but these guys lived in Juarez, so I had to figure out something that day. So I thought, you know what, let's go ahead and record, if that's okay with you. And they were both like, yeah, let's go ahead and record. So I recorded the stories. You know, they were vastly different. Juan is a real talker. He, you know, he talked and talked and talked on the recorder for like an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half. And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is amazing. He's sharing this intensely personal stuff with me. And, you know, he's such a good storyteller and this is wonderful material. But in my head, I'm also thinking like, oh my God, I have to edit this down to 5 minutes. And I had the exact opposite experience with Frank. Frank is just a really laconic character. I handed over the recorder to him and he just looked at it like it was a snake, you know? And he really, I had to ask him questions in order to get him to say anything at all. And even then, the responses would be like 1-sentence responses. And so I was just beside myself after this first meeting. I contacted the principal investigator of the project and I said, listen, I totally screwed this up. I did this all wrong. You know, it's supposed to be like, as a facilitator, I am completely and as much as possible minimizing my influence. But in the case of both of these digital storytellers, that I was going to have a huge influence over the shape of the story. You know, when you've got an hour and a half of material and you have to edit it down to 5 minutes, this guy Juan had all kinds of things in his story that were important details that leaving them out would really shape the story in one direction or another. He had a criminal history. He had served in the US military. He had children. He had all kinds of stuff going on. And so I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, like, okay, if I leave out his military service, then I'm going to be, you know, erasing this whole incredibly important part of his identity. If I leave out his criminal history, then it's almost like I'm editing something out to try to make him seem like a person he's not, you know? So anyway, like I said, I was having this sort of crisis of feeling like I did the whole thing wrong. And I went to the principal investigator, I talked to him about it, and he said, you know what, it's fine. Like, this is how field work is. Things don't always turn out as planned, and you just gotta roll with it. Well, it all kind of taught me something about this process. I think the reality is that there are going to be restrictions to any given situation, and there are also just going to be different kinds of storytellers. Some people are very, very invested in the process, but then there are other storytellers who have different priorities. They want to be involved, they want to share their story, they want to do something for their community, but they're busy, they've got other commitments, and they want to tell the story once, they want to get together, tell you the story, they want to have you edit it down and kind of do all the work. In the end, they'll okay it. And you know, that's kind of the amount of time that they're willing to give to the project. So I just learned in the end to adapt to varying expectations of what the collaboration was supposed to be. You know, as unique and different as people are, that's how different the collaboration process has been every single time I've done this. And I'm now on something like 35. You know, like I said, you've got some people who are highly invested and want to have a hand in every single part of the process. And you've got some people who are like happy to be involved and they're just not that picky about how it turns out. And Juan, actually, my very first participant, was kind of on the latter end of the spectrum. So I will go ahead and show you how his video turned out. This is the very first digital story I ever made.
My father got deported when I was like 7. He was deported when I was 7, and he came to he came back to Mexico, and that was it. That was the end of it. You know, I didn't hear from my dad for like 30 years, and I maybe seen him twice within 30 years. Like, you know, I went to California to visit my aunt, and my mom's like, hey, your dad's in the neighborhood. He wants to see you. It's been 10 years since you've seen him. And it was kind of awkward because, when I went to go visit my dad, I was young. I was like 14 the first time I seen him after like 7. So, I went to go see him, and he the whole time he drank a lot. He was doing drugs. He told me, turn your head, don't look. And he turned his head, and and he took me to a birthday party, told me it was my birthday, but it wasn't. Somebody else was cutting cake, and he bought me a bottle of tequila for my birthday and got me drunk. And so I said, time passed, and after I got deported, um, I came to Mexico, and I had been 30 years. And he still drinks, he still does the things that he does, and we don't have any type of relationship. Not knowing my father, not having, well, actually, not having any good memories of my father. Every memory that I've ever had of my father was either a bad one or not even being there. I remember when I was younger, expecting maybe a letter or something to pop up when I was younger. That you're a kid and hoping that he's going to come this time this year, and he doesn't show up. And in the long run, uh, I feel with my relationship with my kids, I know I'm a good father, but I see the cycle. I got deported. I made mistakes. When I got out of prison, I only had one son. Well, with my wife, I had 2 children, and when my wife came, she became pregnant. She went to the United States, had my daughter first. Her name's Yasmin. She stayed in the United States, I think, 9 months. So I went without seeing my child and my wife for about 13 months. I met my daughter through Facebook Messenger for about 9 months till I finally got to actually see her for the first time and hold her. As soon as she came back and I met my daughter, she got pregnant again. So she went back to the United States, left for another like 9, 10 months, had my son, and I waited the same thing, a good while to actually meet him. People say, you have a great wife. Not a lot of people would leave their parents, their mom, go to a country where they don't speak the language, and give everything up to be with you. I gave her the option. I gave her the option when I came here, and I told her, look, I got deported for life. She was, it was just, what, 5.5? I told her, you're 25 years old. I said, you're young. My son barely knows me. He's not going to hurt him too bad. I said, go ahead and move on. Find another man. I won't be mad at you. I promise. I said, I know I love you, and I know you love me, but this is not a good place for you. And she said, you know what? I married you, and we promised that we would be together for the bad and the good. She's like, wherever you go, I don't care if we live under a rock, in a cave. She's like, I'm going to be with you to the end, and I'm going to support you. Man, it was awesome for her to tell me that. So you sure? She said, yeah. So she came. We sold everything: our TV, our furniture. She sold everything, our car. Came to Mexico, and we've been living here. But she comes 6 months at a time because we haven't had the money to make her a Mexican citizen so she can stay. But now she comes on a temporary 6 months, and after 6 months, she has to go back to the United States. I don't want to say she deserves better, but I can't ever thank her enough for everything she's done for me, for being there, supporting me, for giving me beautiful children, and she's such a good mom. And I know it's hard for her because like all her medical issues with her brain and her headaches and her back problems, and uh, she's been there raising 3 kids half the time that I've been there half the time. She's been there full time. She's never been without our kids, and I'm there half the time. And like right now, I'm here, and I don't have to worry about the responsibility to feed them, to change them, take them to school, and buying their clothes. And she does everything without me. And like I'm here, and I make pesos, so I can't send her no money to help her provide because what I make in 1 week, people here we make 1,000 pesos a week is like the average a week, which over there is like $50 a week. And I can't send my wife half my paycheck to help support her because I can't live off $25 a week. It's one of the worst places. Like there's like maybe 1 or 2 people constantly get killed every day. Every day, you read the news, and like I said, I try not to read the media so much because there's so many bad things going on. They 5, 6 people get their heads chopped off, cut up people in body bags and put them right there, and it affects me because it scares me. But at least I want to be aware of what's going on in my surroundings. But it's not a safe place to live. I keep to myself. I don't go out. I really don't associate with nobody. I keep to myself because I built a little bubble, comfort zone in my own house, in my own place, and that's where I like to stay. It's not easy, you know. It's not easy. My children is probably what hurts me more than anything. Like I said, I love my wife to death. I love my wife to death, but you know, my children are what hurt me most because they're too young to understand why and what's going on, and our decisions not only affects me but them too. Only thing that I pray for is that my children grow up to be good human beings, loving, responsible people, educated with good manners. I used to take my kids to baseball games, play baseball, teach my son how to read. I'm sorry. That's the hardest thing, my kids to talk about. It's all I want. And like a lot of people tell me I'm a good dad. I don't feel it because I can't be there. I don't know. I just want them to be proud of me. That's it. I want to, yeah. That's it, basically. I want them to be proud of their daddy. So at least I tried. To be the best person I can be. That's it. And just watch them grow up. Be able to, you know, say goodbye to my mom when she's gone. That's it. Okay, let me get my baby.
What's up, Juju?
Shaba. Oh man, my baby boy. I know. Oh, come here. Here's your papa. Here's your papa. Come here. Yeah. It's cold. Oh, it's too little. Oh, just give me 1 minute. It's so little.
Got blue eyes.
There's my baby. Tan chiquito.
Is that your daddy? Chava, is that y'all? Is that your daddy?
Chaba.
Oh, he's loving you. Oh.
He likes to look
I
around.
almost said Chava. Is that Chava? Chava, that's your daddy. Yeah, Chava.
Papa. I'm your dada. Now you get to see my face. I'm on the phone no more. Come on, let's go.
So I really love the way that Juan's video ends, partly because that was a really personal touch for him. I had kind of done all of the work of editing the video. Juan didn't really want to be involved in that part of the process. You know, so when I showed him the final product, he just pretty much gave it the thumbs up. But then he said, hey, you know what, actually, why don't we tack on some kind of personal video at the end? And he picked it out, the video where he met his son for the first time. And he was very opinionated about wanting to show the whole thing all the way through. And I really love that because it made the process more collaborative, which for me was sort of more in keeping with the spirit of the project. And also because I think it just makes it a more affecting video. So I'll come back to Juan's video in a little bit, but I want to make sure to talk a little bit about recruiting, because for me, recruitment was by far the hardest part of my Fulbright experience. So I went to Tijuana as an independent investigator. And I think being sort of an independent researcher meant something different for me than it does mean for some other Fulbright participants. A lot of researchers go and join a lab. They go to Mexico City and they're part of a certain kind of scientific research where there's like a lab and sort of a ready-made community waiting for them there. But it wasn't my experience. I hit the ground and I didn't know anybody. I didn't know a soul. Even my mentors, I kind of had like mentors on paper in the area, but they weren't really hands-on. My more hands-on mentor was actually at UC Davis. So, he did his best to connect me with people from a distance, but I just had a really hard time getting plugged in, a really hard time. It was partly a language barrier thing. I had a hard time putting myself out there. I think also I had a hard time talking to people who really didn't know anything about the project. Whenever I had success recruiting someone to participate, it was someone who already knew about the project and knew kind of about the credibility of the project in TJ. There's a whole network of people in Tijuana who have already participated with Humanizing Deportation. And once you know one of those people and you know that the project is legit and doing something good, then, I was much more likely to recruit those people. I felt for the first 4 or 5 months of my time there, really almost all the time I was there, I felt like I was doing something wrong. Like, oh, there are these other people who are just going to be chattier than me or better than me at this kind of work, and they're going to be better at recruiting. But I guess what I learned in the end is that there really is no substitute for time spent in the community. I did eventually end up building a community for myself in TJ. I went to so many meetings, I volunteered at so many places, and I worked with so many people that in the end now I'm sort of known to the different activist communities and organizations within the city. I have built up a network of people I've worked with, slowly. Almost my only success in recruiting was through snowballing. You get that one person, you get the second person, you get the third person. Maybe the third person drops out of the project because they feel it's too emotional and they can't handle it, but they're willing to recommend you to a friend of theirs. And then you follow up with that person and, slowly over time, I got myself into a place where I had, a pool of people to draw from. And, now after working with the project for about 2 years, if I were to go to Tijuana next week, which I can't do because of the virus, obviously, but, I would be able to very quickly drum up new participants through connections and people I know there. So now we're getting near the end of the story of my Fulbright experience. Like I said, it was really, really slow to start. I eventually, bit by bit, built up contacts, and those contacts started to become a network. And by the time by the time I was in month 6, I had more work than I could possibly handle. I was going out into the community multiple times a week to meet with new collaborators and really serious collaborators who would follow through with the process to the end. It's funny to think about because just a few months before that, I was just agonizing over how bad of a job I was doing and how I was going to be the first person ever in the history of the Fulbright to fail her Fulbright. And, here I am about 2 years later. I am personally responsible for about 10% of the archive's content. So I fell in love with the project. I fell in love with digital storytelling. I felt like I want to become a better digital storyteller. I want to learn how to be a facilitator for group storytelling, stuff like that. I just wanted to learn more about the genre. So I signed up for a bunch of training with StoryCenter, which I've already kind of told you about. But I began to learn their methodology and sort of the differences between the Humanizing Deportation version and the StoryCenter version. Which we can talk about a little bit more after I show you this next video. This is the video I made. So this is me directly coming off my Fulbright. I got home back to the United States, and I think, a day or 2 later, I entered my first StoryCenter workshop, and that's where I made this video. When I met Erica and Sheena, I had been alone for a long time. I was living in Mexico on a grant, working for a digital storytelling project. I met with people who'd been deported from the United States. One day, I'd hear a story about a man who was sold by his biological father to American tourists. The next day, a story about a woman whose son was murdered by the cartel. His body was found in a suitcase. The truth is, it was really hard. I grew up in rural Indiana, where everyone's idea of systemic injustice is the speed trap on Dixon. I didn't know anyone in Tijuana, and I only half spoke the language. I spent my first 3 months there making lentil quesadillas in my concrete basement apartment. Enter Erica and China, who volunteered to participate in my project. Our first meeting turned into a series of hangouts that ended in late-night Mexican charcuterie, that is, a plate of chips and crumbled jerky smothered in lime juice and hot sauce. I remember one night in particular, having beers at a seaside sports bar, watching a boxing match. I thought we were there to see Canelo Alvarez, but when the American fighter took the ring, China and Erica, both deportees, sang the national anthem. A few weeks before the end of my grant, Erica's teenage daughter was in a car accident in Orange County. She was in a coma. We tried everything to get Erica over the border, a humanitarian visa, an emergency travel visa. I crossed on foot to get documents from her family. She talked to the consulate, to Border Patrol officers, who said no, who destroyed her documents, who told her to give up hope of ever seeing her daughter again. One night, we stood outside the San Isidro border, holding hands, praying. We sent her off to talk to the chief and waited for hours in the car, watching the pedestrian bridge, hoping not to see her slight form, her shoulder bag, at the mouth of the path back to Mexico. As of today, Unique has been unconscious for 4 weeks, and Erica's still in Tijuana, an hour south of the hospital where her daughter might be dying. Now, they call me family. In less than 2 months, we went from strangers to family. And if that's true, if I'm family, how impenetrable is that wall, really? At the same time, my Fulbright ended. I kissed my American-raised friends goodbye, and I was able to pack my bags and go home. So that is the story of me and my friends Erica and China. It's a true story about something that happened in the last month or two of my Fulbright. And part of the reason I had such an intense Fulbright experience, and part of the reason probably that I'm so personally invested in this kind of work. But I wanted to show it because I think watching a StoryCenter made video is kind of a different experience than watching a Humanizing Deportation video. And part of the reason for that is because for StoryCenter, it is central to the idea of digital storytelling that this be a personal story, that this be a process of you grappling with your own thoughts and ideas, your history, to create something that speaks to yourself and your story individually, but also to the community in a larger way. And obviously, Humanizing Deportation is that's not quite the same story. You know, what we try to do is minimize the influence of the facilitator as much as possible, but it's just not possible to ensure that every single video comes out exactly as it would if the storyteller themselves made it from start to finish. It's always going to be a collaboration, which kind of complicates that that vision of the digital story as something that is intensely personal and individualized, but it also creates an opportunity for this cross-cultural dialogue, not only you know, in a larger way, like we're publishing stories about immigration on an internationally known project's website, and that website is used in university classrooms on both sides of the border. Like, certainly it does promote a greater dialogue in that way, but it also promotes a greater dialogue, or I should say maybe a smaller dialogue, between the facilitator and the participant. It creates a cross-cultural relationship, a connection, a kind of community. And I can't tell you how many people I've had say to me after the process is finished that this process was incredibly meaningful for them on a number of levels, but one of those levels is that they have felt forgotten. Nobody has cared enough to hear the story, and especially nobody American. You know, going through the process with a facilitator, with somebody who actually cares to sit down and listen and put all this work into getting the story put together and out there into the world, that process was healing for them. Another reason that I wanted to show you this video is that I think the juxtaposition between Juan's video and this video can kind of tell you a few things about, well, at least about my evolution as a digital storyteller, between, you know, my early digital storytelling and more like what my digital storytelling looks now, which has been greatly influenced by my training with StoryCenter. So there are a couple of things to note. One of them is obviously just the use of music and other sound effects to kind of create a tone or a mood. Another way is the more sparing use of visuals in the second digital story. So when I was trained on Humanizing Deportation, I had these kind of rigid rules in my mind for how visuals should be used in digital stories. You know, I was thinking, okay, well, we have to have a huge number of photos because we need a photo for every 5 or 6 seconds of the video. On top of that, there was this kind of imperative to create visual interest within each photo so that it doesn't just feel kind of like click, click, click through a slideshow. So there are all these effects going on. There's a zoom in, there's a zoom out, there's a pan to the side, there's a pan up on basically every single photo the entire time, which is itself a kind of monotony. And what I learned in my workshops with StoryCenter is to not just use visuals as like, okay, whatever it is that I'm talking about in my audio track, if I say, you know, dog, then there's a picture of a dog. If I say fire station, then there's a picture of a fire station. Rather than just kind of repeating that meaning from the audio to the visual track, more like adding another layer of meaning by adding in a visual that will complement or complicate whatever's going on in the audio. So for example, you know, in the very beginning of that video, you see the slow push in on one photo for a really long time. It's very, very close. It's very zoomed in. So you're having to try to figure out what the visual even is. You're working to kind of mentally place yourself and figure out what's going on screen. And in a lot of ways that kind of mirrors the experience I had in TJ. You know, not knowing where I was, not knowing where to go, not knowing any people, just kind of like trying to orient myself in that world. And then of course there's like the Where's Waldo pants that I was wearing at the time that, you know, kind of add, like, it's obviously not a great picture of me, but me being in the Where's Waldo pants and, you know, the slow, incredibly zoomed in, and then we sort of start to piece together what the photo is, to me had a kind of meaning that I thought was effective and descriptive in terms of that digital story when you put everything all together. Another thing that you can kind of see a difference between these two stories is the length. The second one is much shorter than the first one. The first one's like 8 minutes long. The second one I think is 3.5 minutes. So the easy thing to say about that is that one organization has a preference for brevity while the other doesn't. I mean, it's certainly true that StoryCenter has a preference for brevity. They really have a focus on homing in on the heart of the story as efficiently as possible. And usually their digital stories are going to be around 2 to 3 minutes long. Whereas Humanizing Deportation, our digital stories are 5 to 6 minutes long. A lot of times there are multi-part arcs. You know, we might have 3 5-minute digital stories as part of a series that this person wants to do. It's all up to the storyteller. But I think, you know, if you unpack that a little bit, what we start to discover is that there is a fundamental difference in the purpose of the storytelling, because with StoryCenter, you've got an organization that really thinks the process is the point. It is the process that the individual goes through as they think about their experiences, they reflect on them, they try to figure out what the story is. And then, you know, the end process of sharing that with their community. Whereas a project like Humanizing Deportation was created because we're trying to collect these stories and disseminate them and get them out there in the world. The process is incredibly important. It's been important to me every single time with every collaborator I've worked with. But I think there is a difference in that Humanizing Deportation was created because there was a dearth of firsthand accounts of the deportation process. And so I guess it's, you know, by necessity, it's just more of an end goal minded or product minded approach to the process of digital storytelling. There's just one more thing I wanted to mention before kind of some closing remarks, which is I think it's important to acknowledge the emotional toll of this kind of work for anybody who does this kind of work, or anybody who might be interested in it in the future. Especially once I really got into the swing of my digital storytelling and I was meeting up with people regularly to hear these incredibly impactful stories. I was hearing stories every single day about very intense trauma. Several days in a row, I would meet with a person who would tell me the story of being separated from their young child, and they would cry. A lot of times I couldn't stop myself from crying with them. You know, the very next day I would meet with someone whose son was killed by the cartel and his body was found in a suitcase. The very next day after that, I would meet with someone who, you know, was beaten almost to death by the police, by an authority that should have been protecting him. And so I don't know what else to say about that, other than I think it's important to acknowledge the emotional aspect of doing this kind of work. I have learned, and I'm still learning a lot that is informing my creative writing, because I'm working on a novel that deals with the themes of citizenship, belonging, alienation, all kinds of emotional themes that I'm able to learn about by hearing individual stories. So I think I'll go ahead and conclude my presentation by saying thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and participate in this process. And I'll look forward to speaking with you more at the conference.
Cruzamos el río Bravo y eso allí fue donde comenzó la experiencia más fuerte, porque cruzamos el río Bravo y pues lógico, migración comenzaba a buscarnos porque ya empezaban a detectan que cruzas, pero nos escondió, el guía nos escondió también, que no pasó nada, y estuvimos unas 3-4 horas en esa noche, en esa madrugada, estuvimos como 4 horas. Desde ahí el guía nos dijo que él tenía que regresar a la orilla del río para que regresara por la comida que había dejado ahí. Esa fue la última vez que miré al guía, porque no volvió a regresar por nosotros. No quiero pensar que fue mala intención. Yo pienso que como había mucha migración, pudieron haberlo agarrado. Lo estuvimos esperando desde las 5 de la mañana hasta las 7 de la noche. En ese lapso de ese tiempo yo me enfermé. Tuve mucha fiebre. Me imagino que por la picadura de los mosquitos. Tuve una fiebre muy fuerte. No tenía cómo medir la temperatura, pero creo que estaba más de 38 grados, ¿sí? A mi temperatura. Pero por fortuna había una muchacha que recuerdo que llevó una pastilla que dijo que era para eso, para la fiebre, y me lo dio. Se me calmó un poquito la fiebre. Mi esposa pues ahí estaba conmigo, nos escondieron, todos estábamos debajo de un matorral, ahí estábamos metidos. Pero llegaron a las 7 de la noche y el guía nunca llegó. Sí, en ese momento ya me sentía un poco mejor. Pero empezó a lloviznar. A lloviznar. Estuve lloviznando desde las 7, 8 hasta las 10 de la noche. De los 17 que estábamos ahí se desesperaron, empezaron a entrar en pánico. Y dijeron que teníamos que caminar. Ahí fue donde comenzamos a caminar. Uno de ellos pues se ubicaba a qué dirección teníamos que caminar. Y ahí fue donde empezamos a caminar nosotros, que con una brújula de juguete, con esa brújula de juguete comenzamos a caminar. En esa primera noche caminamos todos juntos, los 17. Pero ya llegando al amanecer, muchos ya empezaron a tener hambre, sed. Y con la comida que habíamos tenido no nos alcanzó. Prácticamente la madrugada se terminó. Entonces muchos empezaron a quedar, pero pues yo tenía miedo a quedarme ahí. Sí, entonces tenía que caminar con los que seguían fuerte. Tenían todavía fuerza, seguimos caminando. Después de 6 días de camino, en el desierto, perdidos, sin que encontráramos ningún rancho, nada, solamente sobrevivimos 10. Los demás, puedo asegurar que de las demás personas, la mayoría han de haber perdido la vida. Después de los 6 días, 3 días más, estuvimos perdidos los 10 que sobrevivimos. En esos 3 días, creo que fue la parte más fuerte, porque cuando nosotros, recuerdo que empezamos a querer comer porque ya no teníamos comida, empezamos a comernos los nopales, sí, empezamos a comer nopales y empezamos a abrir un poco más. Empezamos a comer, ese fue el primer día. Recuerdo que encontrábamos mucho, eso sí, era algo que teníamos mucho pánico, porque encontrábamos todo tipo de víboras en el camino. Víboras, encontramos cadáveres de personas que fallecieron en ese transcurso de ese lugar. También encontramos, por ejemplo, lugares donde había muchas maletas, así bolsas, mochilas. Y en ese lugar, creo que fue el segundo día cuando encontramos ese montón de maletas. Esas maletas que estaban ahí, empezamos a esculcarlas, ¿sí? Y encontramos pedazos de pan, ¿sí? Pedazos de pan que estaban así como ya con lama, ¿sí? Y recuerdo que encontramos una bolsa de sabritas, ¿sí? Una bolsa de sabritas, de papas creo que era. Y pues nos las empezamos a comer así como estaban casi echadas a perder. Nos comimos entre 10 y decidimos descansar en una noche, decidimos descansar porque pues ya estábamos bien cansados caminando. Decidimos descansar y así en la intemperie, en las piedras, en la tierra, nos dormimos un rato. Y luego despertamos, ya que despertamos, como volvimos a caminar el siguiente día, llegamos a un lugar donde encontramos atún, 3 latitas de atún que dejaron tirado por ahí, me imagino que pues igual. Igual entre los 10 nos los comimos.